Understand?
We weren't
Okay.
really sure.
Okay.
We were just kind of like, she said, oh no, so we wrote down, oh no. And then she smushed a banana, so we did that. She's probably feeling frustrated, and she's probably thinking, oh no.
All right. So she smashed the banana is a good indicator that she felt frustrated. So think about why would she feel frustrated? Right,
She can't see.
right. But why is that frustrating? Right? Why is it frustrating to not be able to see?
Because it inhibits you from completing the action when there's an easier way. We can just, like,
Yeah, it inhibits your action, but
take off your glasses and it'd be so easy.
right. But why does that bother you? Like, why do we feel uncomfortable when we have one of our senses taken away?
Because your other sensory perception is heightened.
Yeah, you feel like you're handicapped, right? So I mean, that can give you a really good insight if you're looking at, if you're working with the School for the Blind, or if you're working with, an elderly person that can't get around as well as you can. Those things that you do that you take for granted, they may live that every day, and how they go through that, they may feel frustrated all the time. Right? So getting to some of those things to kind of understand how people come from, or you can even think about, right, if you're designing smartphones, there are things that you do on your smartphone that drive you crazy, or you change the operating system and there's some new button and it drives you crazy, right? So like my iPad, I like to zoom in and out with the pinch and zoom thing, and they've done a new thing where when you zoom out enough, you go out to like all the applications that are open, and I hate it, and it drives me crazy, right? And it's such a simple thing, but you feel like something you knew how to do has been taken away from you, and it's frustrating, right? So those kind of like trying to understand the way people react to devices or products is bigger than, it's bigger than just what it technically does. Right? Does that make sense? So that's kind of what you're getting at. You want to keep going through those levels of like, why? Like, so you smashed a banana. Why would you do that, right? And you could have the simple answer, but what's the depth, right? So that's what this is trying to get at, is like, keep driving down. Okay?
Okay, thank you.
Cool. You guys getting somewhere? You know how to make blind sandwiches now? Okay, cool. All right, now that you guys have had a chance to kind of go through and look at this twice, now that you guys have had a chance to take a look at this same kind of information twice, does anybody have an example they want to share? Okay, what is something that one of you saw your contestant do? Nathan? Wait for them to fight for the ingredients, so they're just standing back waiting? Okay, and what do you think that they thought or felt as they were doing that? They didn't want to fight for it, right? So I didn't give a time limit, right? So they knew they could kind of take their time, or thought that they could. So that's very good. So why do you think that they would not want to get in and engage and get to what they are doing quickly? Non-confrontational, maybe, right? Maybe kind of a passive person and rather stand back, right? What do you think? Who is your contestant? Charya? Charya, why'd you stand back? Figured you might as well wait. So you'd rather avoid confrontation, right? So what if I had told you that you had 2 minutes to make the sandwich? Would you have probably been more pushy, right? So kind of understanding some of the boundary conditions, what people are working with, right? So maybe they had this behavior because they knew they could take all the time that they needed to, or at least she thought she could, right? So that's a very good example. Anybody else? Something that your person did? Yeah. Well, I didn't stop the two, right? Did you guys know each other? Sorry? Do you know whoever you were pushing and shoving? Okay. So you guys know each other, so you felt comfortable, right? So they felt okay with shoving each other up here in front of a bunch of people, right? So that's another kind of emotional thing to get to, right? How do people interact with each other? And maybe pushing and shoving each other might be a sign that they don't like each other, Or it could be a sign that they're friends and they know each other before, or maybe acquaintances, I don't know. Right? So kind of getting to those understandings where you saw them pushing each other, and I just assumed that they were competitive and they were in a hurry, but maybe it was more of having familiarity. So some of those things you can start to understand about how people interact. So that seems trivial here, but when you are out doing design work, that can be a big deal. So some of those kind of observations can really get to be a big deal. I'll share with you a little bit of an example of that. So some of you know, before I came back here to Purdue to work with EPICS program, I was an engineer at Biomet, and I designed knee implants and instruments, okay? So for total knee replacement. And we were doing a project that we were working on low-cost instruments for deploying in developing countries where maybe there wasn't enough money to pay for the very expensive instruments that were used in the developed world. And I really threw my heart and soul into this because I really cared about bringing this procedure to places where they didn't have it, right? So, I mean, you may not know, accessibility to a lot of medical procedures around the world is very limited by the cost of the devices, right? So, and the instrumentation to do them. So we were trying to bring a more affordable solution, but I wanted it to be really phenomenal solution, right? Just because it didn't have bells and whistles didn't mean it couldn't be something that could bring people pain relief and function. And worked very hard on it, but I wanted to go visit the surgeons and the patients in the countries that we were going to be deploying this into. And when I asked my management to do that, they said, no, we have people in those countries, just call them and ask them your questions, okay? So I put together a big list of all the technical questions that I had and got them all answered and designed the set of instruments that I thought was really great. And we built some of those sets and sent them out for trial, and they were a huge flop, right? So I was really frustrated because I'd worked very hard on it, and I thought that I understood all of the technical details that I needed to know. But what I lacked was any empathy at all for these users because I hadn't met a single one, right? They were the definition of the faraway user that existed sort of in my imagination, and I had never met any of them, right? So just getting those technical answers doesn't get you to the kind of empathy that you need to be able to have real insights into how people use things, right? So, you know, those kind of experiences where you can get immersed in a culture, where you can understand what people are doing and build that human connection. That's why those of you who were here last week, we talked about in an interview, it's more about knowing the person and being able to connect with them than about the technical details. And that seems trivial, but it's not, okay? So it can have a real impact on the outcome of your product. So we put a lot of money and time into designing things that don't work for people, right? So as you went through and you thought about how did they feel, what did this do, when you get that done, you guys may be young to see this, but this is sort of the moment of truth in Super Mario Brothers, right? You're coming across, and if you fall down this thing, you're done for, right? So you have to make this leap from what you know, what you've built up and observed, to make that inference about what could this mean to the end product, right? So what does it mean when you're designing a set of instruments for them to look or feel a certain way that people are used to, right? When you're designing a product, what does it mean if I change this feature to the user outside of just what it technically does? What does it mean to them on an emotional level? What does it mean to them in terms of being willing to buy a product, right? So you all make emotional buying decisions all the time. You know, we all do. It's part of human nature. So when you're designing a product that you want to sell, that's a big deal. You want to make sure that you're resonating with people on an emotional level so they buy your product. So getting that inference, trying to understand where people are coming from is an important thing. So extending this experience that you had today watching your teammates bumble through making these sandwiches, they were all doing something in a way that was different than how you would do it. And most of the time in design, you're going to design things for people who are different than you, right? Very rarely will you design something for your perfect demographic, okay? So you want to design things for other people. So you need to try and understand how they live and being able to see, you know, what's it like to walk in their shoes? What's it like to make a sandwich with no knife, or to do it without being able to see, or with your left hand? So if you didn't notice, I used a right glove to make it a little harder. So you had to do all that left-handed. Okay, I assume you're probably right-handed. But you can look at these kind of dichotomies, and these are almost always spectrums, right? So very rarely, like, what is young, what is old. These are always on a spectrum, but people will be different than you. You guys are all, 18 to 22 years old. You're going to work with people who are really old like me, and you have to kind of understand what are some of the societal things where I come from, right? You'll have people who are rational versus emotional. This is a challenge for engineers because most of us are rational, right? Most of the rest of humanity is not. So you'll have to struggle to try and connect with people and understand the way that people are feeling, right? So I could give you one that's probably in the news a lot right now. Some of you like Bernie Sanders. Some of you like Donald Trump. You guys don't understand each other at all, right? Like you couldn't be more different. But there are fundamental underlying things that are still the same, okay? So if you were trying to design a political campaign for people who liked Donald Trump, but you are a kind of person who likes Bernie Sanders, you're going to have to get in their shoes and understand them, and vice versa, right? So there are these dichotomies of people, and they're always on a spectrum, but trying to be able to see the other side is a big deal. Does that make sense to everybody? So these are a bunch of examples, but by no means limited. You're working for people in a different country. You're working for people who are in a hurry versus people who are patient. It's a big difference, okay? That's a huge difference. So if you're working with a surgeon who is in a rush for everything they do and will give you 30 seconds of their time, or if you're working with a librarian who's maybe equally busy, maybe not, right? Those kind of things, you need to understand where they're coming from and put aside your assumptions about where they're coming from. So those are just a few examples. So speaking of, I made the example of a librarian, which I was trying to think of someone who might be not in a big hurry, and then I thought about the librarians that I've seen at the library being in a huge hurry. I thought about this beginner's mind, okay? So when you come into doing those observations or that engagement or that immersion, you come in with this huge list of biases and preconceived notions that you've built up through your experiences. And oftentimes those can cause you to filter what you observe, right? So if you are that Donald Trump supporter and you're interviewing a bunch of Bernie Sanders supporters, you may be looking at them right off the bat thinking this person is wrong and they don't know what they're talking about. But if you can come in with a beginner's mind, have a completely clean slate and try and understand why do they feel this way and not judge people. So we're very quick to judge different people's points of view. If you can come in and not judge and have that a mind like a child, right? So you're not putting any of your own biases or preconceived notions, then you can get to truly understanding why people feel the way they do, why they use things the way they do, and make real observations without your own bias. The hardest people to do this are the most experienced people, okay? So if I went to design a needs system, I would come in with all kinds of preconceived notions about how that would work. But if I took a couple of you who are mechanical engineering students and had you do the same problem, you might come up with something really creative that I would have never seen because I walked in with all of these biases and this experience, right? So by having a less experienced mind, you can sometimes see more creative solutions. So being curious, really listening, and coming in with a beginner's mind can often help you break out of a product or a problem or have a really major insight into how something works that you might not have otherwise, okay? Does that make sense to everybody? Good. So I think we've talked about this, so I want to cover one more thing just a little bit, and that's how to share your empathy. I don't have a whiteboard in here, which is a shame, because I like to do this on a whiteboard, but does anybody know who this is? I heard it. Walt Disney, right? So those of you who don't know Walt Disney World, Walt Disney Studios, there was a real Walt Disney. He was a real person. He's been gone for a while, but he was a brilliant storyteller, okay? And when you want to share your empathy with someone, like when you have your design reviewers and you want to help them understand, or you have someone who you want to get funding, or you want to get buy-in from a manager, okay? So when you get a job someday and you're on a design team, you might assume that the people who you're working for have the same ideals or ideas that you do. Probably not the case. So you're going to have to sell your ideas to them, okay? And telling a story is a really great way to do it because you can share the experiences that you had and help other people to understand your user, okay? So Walt Disney told every story in roughly the same way, okay? So on a time scale, you usually start at some kind of a low emotional state, right? There was a problem, and this is the same thing that happens with our designs, right? There's a problem, and then we say you're the user, you come up with some solution, and it doesn't work, right? And then EPICS students come in and they build you a solution and it doesn't work. And then they come through and they work on that some more and come back and they've got this great solution and it's happily ever after, right? So this is the Walt Disney cycle of telling a story. So somebody want to give me your favorite Disney movie? Up? Okay. So oh man, Up is a good one. So at the beginning of Up, you've got, what's the guy's name? Huh? Carl? Okay, so Carl meets Ellie, and they're going to go on their big adventure, and then life gets them down, and bad things happen, and she dies, right? So you hit this low point. So another thing to realize in every Disney movie, which you don't have to do this with your stories, in every Disney, the first down point is always usually whoever cares for someone most dying, right? Everybody's parents die, right? So Anna and Elsa's parents have to die in a shipwreck. If you like Ratatouille, he gets estranged from his dad, right? So whoever takes care of you has to be killed off right away. And then, so Carl then gets this great idea to hook balloons to his house, and he floats off, and then he finds that kid is with him, and then he's bummed out again. And then he finds they're at Paradise Falls, and they find this cool bird, and all this happens, and then he finds that his childhood hero is a terrible villain, and then they save the day and fly off in their house, and all is good, right? And he takes care of the little kid and goes to his scout meeting, whatever, right? So these stories all rise in emotion and fall, and rise. So we had this problem, and we made a solution. We worked through that, and we got better, and we worked through that, and we got better, right? So as you go through and tell the story of your user and the story of your project to other people, steal Walt Disney's genius, because this is a very simple framework for a story, but it works every time, right? So every single Disney movie works this way, right? And if you watch them, you'll see there's always this rise and fall, where you have an emotional high, and it keeps building up as you go. You also remember next time you watch one that someone has to die, always, and it's usually whoever takes care of the person. So use that format when you share your stories with other people, and it will help engage them. It is familiar format. So I'm not a great storyteller. Most of you won't be, but Walt was. So take advantage of his genius. All right. You guys have a lovely week.